Clara woke with a jolt, her heart racing as a chilling scream echoed through her apartment. It wasn't just a scream, it was desperate, haunting, and felt too close, like it came from within her mind. The air around her thickened, and the shadows twisted unnaturally. She whispered, "It can't be real," but the sensation of being watched was undeniable. Her safe haven now felt like a cage, and every movement in the apartment seemed deliberate, as if something unseen was following her. She tried to steady herself, reaching for her phone, but the chilling presence lingered, leaving her on edge. Clara's hands were shaking as she dialed Maggie's number. She had to hear a familiar voice, something to ground her in the reality that felt like it was slipping away. Maggie picked up on the third ring. "Clara, what's going on?" Maggie's voice was always so calm, but tonight, it grated on Clara's nerves. "Maggie, you won't believe me. There's something wrong here. I heard a scream. It came from outside, but it felt like it was right here, in my room." The silence on the other end stretched for a moment, and Clara's anxiety surged. "It's just your imagination, Clara. You've been under a lot of stress lately." Clara bit her lip, feeling the lump of frustration rise in her throat. "It wasn't my imagination, Maggie. It was real. I'm not making this up." Maggie's voice softened. Okay, maybe you're right, but you need to calm down. There's a perfectly rational explanation for all this. It's probably just someone yelling outside, maybe some drunk college kids." Clara wanted to scream. How could Maggie not understand? "I can't just forget it. It felt like—" The line went dead before she could finish her sentence. Clara stared at her phone, a deep, gnawing emptiness settling in her chest. Maggie hadn't even believed her. It only made her more certain of one thing. The thing she was facing was real. And she was alone. Clara hung up the phone with a trembling hand, her heart still pounding in her chest. Maggie's dismissal only made the fear grow stronger, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She tried to rationalize, to tell herself that Maggie was right, that it had all been a product of her overactive imagination, the stress of the last few weeks clouding her thoughts. But as she sat in the darkened apartment, something told her that this was far from a simple misunderstanding. The air felt wrong, as though the walls were pressing in on her, suffocating her. Clara stood up, pacing around the room, trying to distract herself. Her eyes flicked to the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m., but sleep felt impossible. Every creak of the apartment felt magnified, every small sound amplified in the oppressive silence. She glanced over her shoulder, a sudden chill crawling up her spine. A shadow seemed to move at the edge of her vision, but when she turned fully, there was nothing there. A wave of nausea hit her, and she clutched the back of the couch for support. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breathing. But deep down she knew it wasn't. Her body on high alert had never felt more aware of every little noise. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her instinct screamed at her to leave, to run from whatever was lurking in the dark. But she couldn't. There was nowhere to run, not when she didn't even know what she was running from. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She crossed the room, her movements stiff and slow as she neared the window, hoping to find some explanation in the dark street below. The world outside was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hum of distant traffic. But then she saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the street, bathed in the flickering glow of a street lamp. The child stood motionless, facing her apartment with a pale, ghostly complexion. Clara's breath hitched in her throat, her heart slamming against her ribs. The child's face was obscured, but even from this distance, Clara could feel the weight of its stare. There was something wrong about it, something that didn't belong. As she stood frozen at the window, the child's head turned slowly, impossibly, toward her. The street lamp flickered, casting an unsettling light across its face, and Clara saw the twisted smile. The image sent a wave of cold dread washing over her, and in a flash, the child vanished, swallowed by the dark. Clara stumbled back from the window, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just seen. No, that wasn't real. she muttered to herself, shaking her head. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had just seen something that was never meant to be seen. Clara stepped back from the window, her legs shaky. The child outside had vanished, but the fear remained. Was it real or a hallucination? Her mind raced, the whispers still echoing in her head. As she reached for her phone, a soft, childlike whisper came again, sending a chill down her spine. "Come closer." Clara froze, her hand shaking as she searched for the source, but the room remained eerily still. Clara tried to move past the images that haunted her, the child's twisted smile, and the endless whispers. Despite daylight, the terror lingered. At night, nightmares returned, each one more vivid than the last. Her apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. Every creak, every shadow made her feel watched. She needed answers, but Maggie didn't believe her. The only person left was Professor Dalton. Clara's call to Professor Dalton was answered after a long pause. "Clara, it's been a while." His voice was deep, calm, yet strained. She could hear something unsettling in his tone, as if he knew more than he was letting on. "Professor, I need your help," Clara pleaded, her voice shaking. "There's something happening here, something I can't explain. I'm being hunted, Professor. I've seen things I can't make sense of. A child in the street, a figure that I can't escape. I'm losing my mind." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Dalton spoke, his voice more serious now. "You're not imagining things, Clara. There are forces at play here, forces that go beyond the physical world. The child you saw, it's not a hallucination. You're being watched, and you are being hunted." Clara felt a chill run through her, her body frozen in place. "What does that mean? What do I do?" she asked, her voice desperate. "You need to find out what it wants," he replied cryptically. "The child is tied to you, Clara. It's not here by accident." And then the line went dead. Clara stared at her phone, feeling more lost than ever. What was she supposed to do now? Clara's heart raced as she paced the room, trying to make sense of Dalton's words. The air in the apartment seemed thicker, more suffocating. She felt like the walls were pressing in on her, the ceiling lowering, inch by inch. The words, "It's tied to you," echoed in her mind, amplifying her fear. Was there something in her past she didn't remember? A connection to the child that had been hidden from her. The idea was maddening, but deep down, Clara felt that this was no coincidence. Her family's history had always been shrouded in mystery, secrets her parents refused to discuss. She had been told stories of strange occurrences when she was younger, things that didn't quite add up. Could this be the culmination of those long-buried secrets? Clara shuddered at the thought, but there was no time to dwell on the past. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront whatever this was head-on. She grabbed her coat and keys, determined to seek out the one person who might have the answers she needed: Sarah. The girl who had lived in the apartment before her. The one who had vanished without a trace. If anyone knew the truth, it was her. Clara's visit to Sarah's old apartment was eerie. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a space that had been left abandoned for what seemed like years. The apartment was a mirror of her own, but the atmosphere was completely different. It felt cold, lifeless, as if it had been drained of all warmth. The furniture was covered in dust, and the air smelled musty, stale with the scent of decay. As she stepped inside, Clara's breath caught in her throat. There in the corner of the room was a child's drawing, pinned to the wall. It was crude, drawn with dark, jagged lines that created an unsettling image. The child in the picture had no face, just a black void where the eyes should have been. Clara felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up as she stared at it. She could feel the presence of someone, watching her from the shadows. The hairs on her arms pricked up as she stepped closer to the drawing. It was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. She tore her eyes away from the picture and turned to leave, but the floor beneath her creaked loudly. She froze, listening, her heart racing. Was she alone in this apartment? Or was something, or someone, waiting for her in the darkness? Clara's heart raced as she took one last look at the apartment, but something stopped her from leaving. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, echoed in her ears. "Stay." It was a child's voice, soft and gentle, yet filled with an unnatural authority. Clara froze in place, her mind screaming for her to leave, to run far away from this place. But her body didn't obey. She stepped forward, unable to stop herself, as if drawn by some invisible force. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper, more oppressive. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the voice came again, clearer this time. "Stay, or else." Clara spun around, her eyes frantically scanning the room, but there was no one there. The air seemed to hum with tension, and she realized, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that the entity wasn't just watching her, it was speaking to her. And it wasn't going to let her leave. Panic surged through Clara as she backed toward the door, but the space around her seemed to warp, the walls closing in. She was trapped. "What do you want from me?" Clara whispered into the darkness, but the only answer she received was silence, thick and suffocating. Then the whisper came again, closer now. "You know what we want." Clara stood motionless in the darkened apartment, her heart racing as the whispering voice seemed to grow louder, echoing in her mind. "Stay, or else." It repeated in the soft, chilling tone of a child, growing more urgent with each passing second. Every inch of the room felt alive, vibrating with a malevolent presence. Clara's breath was shallow, her skin prickling as she backed away slowly, inching toward the door. The weight of the atmosphere pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. "Who are you? What do you want?" Clara whispered, but the only response was the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. The walls seemed to close in as she took another step backward. I can't stay here." Her voice was strained, almost as if she were speaking against the crushing force of fear that gripped her. She turned to the door, her hand reaching for the handle, but just as her fingers brushed it, the whisper came again, clearer than before. "We are part of you." Clara froze. The realization hit her like a cold wave. This wasn't just some random haunting, it was something deeply connected to her very existence. And whatever it wasn't going to let her escape. The door refused to open. She was trapped. Clara's pulse raced as the whispering intensified. "Part of you." The words hung in the air like a dark omen, gnawing at the edges of her sanity. She turned away from the door, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of an escape. The shadows seemed to grow longer, swirling, as if they were coming to life. She was no longer alone in the room. The presence was undeniable. It was as though the very walls had turned against her. The apartment was not just haunted, it was alive. The child, the whispers, the strange occurrences, it was all connected. But how? Clara's mind raced. Was this something from her past? Some forgotten memory or trauma that had come back to haunt her? The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, had never been stronger. She knew deep down that this wasn't just a random haunting. The child, the thing that was tormenting her, it knew her. And whatever it wanted, it was willing to drag her into the depths to get it. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, dialing the number she knew she needed to call. Professor Dalton. She needed answers. And she needed them now. Professor Dalton's voice crackled over the phone as Clara desperately explained what had been happening. "I think you're right to be afraid," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is no ordinary haunting. What you're dealing with is far worse than you can imagine." Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. "What does that mean? Please, tell me what's happening." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Dalton spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "The child you've seen, the one tormenting you, it's a manifestation of an ancient curse, tied to your bloodline. Your family has been marked, Clara. The entity you're dealing with has been following your lineage for generations." Clara's blood ran cold. A curse? Her family? "I don't understand. Why me? Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you've awakened it. The curse is tied to the traumatic events of your past. What you've seen, it's been waiting for the right moment to claim you. You can't outrun it, Clara. You need to confront it head on. Clara's mind was reeling. How do I stop it? She demanded, barely able to get the words out. There was a heavy silence before Dalton answered. You need to uncover the truth about your family's past. Only then can you break the cycle. But be careful. Once it has you, it will never let go. Clara's thoughts were a whirlwind as she hung up the phone. The weight of Dalton's words pressed down on her like a crushing force. Her family, her past, had been hiding something. But what? She was the key to breaking the curse, yet she had no idea where to begin. Every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into the darkness, and with each passing moment, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Clara's fear was palpable, but it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of urgency. She had to understand what had happened to her family, to uncover the buried secrets before it was too late. She couldn't keep running from this, whatever it was. The room seemed to close in on her as she reached for the old family photo album hidden in the drawer of her nightstand. Dust settled on the cover as she pulled it out. She flipped it open, her fingers trembling as she traced the photographs of long-gone relatives, unaware of the hidden history they held. As Clara flipped through the pages, something caught her eye. An old, faded photograph of a child that looked disturbingly familiar. The same twisted smile. The same empty, hollow eyes. Clara's stomach churned. The child was tied to her past, and her bloodline. There was no escape. Clara's mind raced as she stared at the photograph, the realization sinking in like a stone in her chest. The child in the picture, the one with the empty eyes and twisted grin, was connected to her family. But how? What had happened all those years ago that had led to this curse? The more she stared at the photo, the more the room around her seemed to warp and shift. She felt as though the walls were breathing, closing in around her. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in her head. It's time. Come closer. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she backed away from the photograph, panic setting in. Her body trembled, the fear threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to find the truth, no matter the cost. But the more she looked at the photograph, the more it felt like the child was staring back at her, waiting, watching. What do you want from me? Clara whispered, her voice breaking. The only answer was silence. But then from the darkness came the whisper again. You are ours. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the room seemed to close in completely. The curse had awakened, and there was no turning back. Clara sat in the dimly lit apartment, the weight of Dalton's words pressing on her chest. The curse was tied to her family, something that had been buried for years. She had to confront the truth. The photograph of the child haunted her, its hollow eyes staring back at her. It was clear now, the entity that tormented her was part of her bloodline. Her heart raced as she thought of Sarah, the girl who had lived here before. She was the key to unlocking the curse, the link between the past and present. Clara had no choice but to investigate further. The voices in her head urged her to act, to follow the path that had been set before her, but the fear of what she might find held her back. Could she really uncover the truth about her family's dark past? The answer seemed to lie within the walls of this apartment. Everything connected to the child, to Sarah. But the moment Clara decided to search deeper, the room felt colder, like a warning. She had to know, but was she prepared for the horrors hidden in her past? Clara knew she had to visit Sarah's old room again. The answers she sought were hidden there. She felt it in her bones. The apartment, once alive with the presence of the previous tenant, now stood eerily silent. As Clara stepped inside, the air was still, heavy with the weight of its history. She moved toward the corner where Sarah's belongings had been left behind. On the floor, a dusty journal lay open, the pages yellowed with age. Clara picked it up, her fingers trembling as she read the first few entries. The handwriting was frantic, filled with fear and confusion. Sarah had been haunted by the same child, the same entity, long before Clara ever saw it. The journal spoke of a curse, a cycle that could never be broken. Sarah's words were like a warning. There was no escaping the child. As Clara flipped through the pages, the room grew colder, the shadows seeming to stretch out toward her. The curse was real, and now she was part of it. The child had chosen her. Clara's mind raced as she processed the journal's contents. The curse wasn't just about the child. It was tied to something far darker, something that had been passed down through generations. The whispers in her head grew louder as she pieced together the fragments of Sarah's story. The child had been born of the same curse, a manifestation of the family's sins, tied to the bloodline. Sarah had tried to escape, but the child always found her, always came back. It was relentless. Clara now understood that the entity wasn't just a haunting. It was a force that fed off fear, drawing power from the family's trauma. The more she learned, the more trapped she felt. There was no running from this, no escape. But the realization also gave her a sense of purpose. If she could uncover the root of the curse, perhaps she could finally end it. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. The child wasn't finished with her yet, and it wouldn't let her go. Clara's thoughts were racing as she left Sarah's room, her mind trying to make sense of everything. The apartment felt colder now, the air thick with an unnatural chill. She moved quickly through the hallway, but as she neared the exit, she heard it again, the faint whisper of the child. It came from the darkness, a soft, insistent voice. "Come closer." Clara's pulse quickened, and she turned, searching for the source of the sound. Her breath caught as she saw a shadow move in the corner of the hallway. The child's figure, pale and twisted, stepped forward into the light. Its face was blank, its smile twisted and grotesque. The eyes were empty, dark voids that seemed to suck in all light. Clara took a step back, but her feet felt heavy, as though they were stuck to the floor. The child's voice echoed again. "You belong to us." The words froze her in place. Clara realized then that the child wasn't just an entity. It was her legacy, tied to the very core of who she was. Clara knew there was no turning back. The child had found her, and the curse was now a part of her, a shadow she couldn't outrun. The voices whispered louder, urging her to accept her fate, to join them. But Clara couldn't. She refused to be a victim any longer. She had to fight, to break the cycle that had plagued her family for generations. The child had a hold on her, yes, but that didn't mean it had won. With every ounce of strength she had left, Clara focused on the one thing that could weaken the curse: the truth. Her family's history, the sins that had given birth to this nightmare, needed to be uncovered completely. The truth was the weapon she needed to destroy the curse, to free herself and Sarah's tortured soul. Clara knew she had to face the horrors head-on, confront the child, once and for all. She wasn't sure how, but she would find a way. It was time to end this, no matter the cost. Clara stood in the abandoned hallway, her heart hammering in her chest as she stared down the child. The twisted figure seemed to smirk, its blank eyes staring into her soul. The whispers in her head urged her to give in. "You can't escape," they murmured. But Clara's resolve hardened. She had faced fear, she had faced the truth, and now she would face the entity that had tormented her. Her bloodline was cursed, but she refused to let it define her. The child was a manifestation of everything her family had hidden. The sins, the pain, it had all led to this moment. Clara's breath steadied as she stepped forward, facing the child with a fire in her eyes. The shadows around her seemed to darken, the very air thickening with tension. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Clara whispered. The child tilted its head, its smile widening, as if amused by her defiance. But Clara was done being hunted. She would break the curse, no matter the cost. The child's voice echoed through Clara's mind, a cold, mocking whisper. "You are nothing but a shadow, like all who came before you." But Clara stood firm, each word from the child pushing her further into her determination. She had learned the truth, uncovered the dark history of her bloodline. The child was a reflection of the curse, a manifestation of the sins buried in her family's past. But it had no power over her now. Clara had the knowledge, the strength, and the courage to end the cycle. The child's twisted smile faded as Clara began to chant the words she had found in the journal, the ancient ritual that could break the curse. As she spoke, the temperature in the hallway dropped, the shadows shifting violently. The air crackled with energy. The child recoiled, its form beginning to distort. Clara's voice grew louder, more commanding. The curse had lasted long enough. Clara's words reverberated through the hallway, the power of the ritual swirling around her. The child screeched, its form warping as the curse tried to hold on, but Clara's will was stronger. The ritual was breaking the hold the child had over her, unraveling the curse. As the shadows around her twisted and churned, Clara's heart pounded with anticipation. She was close, so close to ending this nightmare. The child's form flickered, shifting between a human shape and a shadowy, monstrous version of itself. With each word Clara spoke, the child shrieked louder, as if trying to resist. But it was futile. Clara's resolve was unshakable. She had to destroy the curse for good, for her family, for herself, and for Sarah. The child let out one final horrific cry as its form began to dissipate, its power weakening. But Clara knew the fight wasn't over yet. The final confrontation was still to come. The room seemed to vibrate with energy as Clara's chanting reached its climax. Ah! The shadows writhed around her, the curse fighting to stay intact, but Clara's words were unyielding. "This ends now," she whispered. The air was thick with tension as the child's form flickered, losing cohesion. In that moment, Clara felt the weight of her ancestors' sins, every betrayal, every hidden horror that had brought this curse into being. But as the final words of the ritual left her lips, a burst of light exploded from her hands, engulfing the hallway in a blinding glow. The child let out one final, anguished scream before vanishing into the light, its twisted form dissolving into nothingness. The shadows that had once haunted the apartment dissipated, leaving Clara standing in the silence, her body trembling from the energy that had surged through her. She had done it. The curse was broken. Clara stood alone in the quiet, her body still trembling as the last remnants of the curse faded away. The hallway was empty now, the oppressive weight of fear gone. The child, the shadow had vanished, and the silence that followed was deafening. She had won, but at what cost? Clara could still feel the echoes of the curse in her mind, the haunting whispers that would never truly leave her. She had broken the cycle, but the darkness would always be a part of her, a reminder of the legacy she had fought so hard to escape. The light in the hallway flickered as Clara turned and walked away, the weight of her journey sinking in. She had confronted her past, faced the horrors of her bloodline, and survived. But there would be no true peace. The child's voice, faint but unmistakable, lingered in her ears. "You will always belong to us." Clara stopped, her heart skipping a beat. The terror wasn't over. It had only just begun. Clara awoke to an unsettling silence. The curse had been broken, but something in her had shifted. The nightmares had ceased, but the echoes of her journey remained, lingering in the corners of her mind. The apartment, once heavy with fear, felt empty, silent in a way that made her uneasy. It wasn't the same place anymore. The weight of the past seemed to hang in the air, invisible but palpable. Clara had faced the child, and for a moment she had felt victory. But now, as she looked around the room, she realized it wasn't over. The sense of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edges of her vision, had not disappeared. The final battle was won, but there was no relief, no sense of closure. Clara felt something stir in her, an unshakable sense that she was still tied to the darkness. She tried to convince herself it was over. She'd broken the curse. She should feel free. But deep down, Clara knew she wasn't. The whispers, faint but insistent, still followed her. The child had been defeated, but its presence remained. Clara walked through the apartment, her footsteps heavy in the stillness. The walls, once filled with the oppressive energy of the curse, now felt like a tomb. Each room, Each corner of the space seemed to be suffocating her. She needed to leave. She needed to find peace, but the world outside felt as cold as the silence inside. Her mind raced as she wondered if there would ever be an escape. The fear that had once been constant had transformed into a gnawing unease, a shadow that clung to her no matter how far she went. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt alien, as if it didn't belong to her world anymore. Clara could no longer remember a time when she felt truly safe. Was it possible to ever forget the horrors she had lived through? She had broken the cycle, but the scar left on her soul would never fade. Maybe she was forever bound to the darkness, no matter how far she ran. Clara decided to leave the apartment, to escape the oppressive memories that clung to it. But as she stepped out into the hallway, the air felt thicker, heavier. The quiet of the building seemed to echo with whispers, familiar voices that she thought she had left behind. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she turned quickly, searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty, just as it had always been. Clara's heartbeat quickened. She could still hear it, the faint rustling, the whispers in the walls. "You can't leave," a voice seemed to say. Clara's breath caught. Had she really escaped? Or was this all part of a never-ending nightmare? She stepped forward, trying to ignore the creeping fear. But the whispers grew louder, and for the first time, Clara wondered if she would ever be free of the past. Clara made her way down the stairs, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. Each step felt like it took her further away from the nightmare, but the whispers still echoed in her mind. She reached the front door of the building and pushed it open, stepping into the cold air of the street. The world outside seemed so normal, too normal. People walked by, unaware of the darkness that had consumed her life. But as Clara walked down the sidewalk, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The air felt different now, charged with an unseen force. Every passing person seemed like a potential threat, their faces blurred by the fog in her mind. She had broken the curse, but it felt like a hollow victory. Her mind screamed that it wasn't over. The child might be gone, but the evil that had once been a part of her bloodline was still out there waiting. And she was its next target. As Clara reached the end of the street, she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. The child's figure stood at the far end of the block, staring at her with those empty, hollow eyes. Clara's stomach dropped, her heart racing. She had thought it was over, but now she knew the truth. The child wasn't gone. It would never leave her. The curse had been broken, but the child was a part of her, a part of her past that she could never escape. She had been haunted by it, and now it had found her again. Clara's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk toward the figure. She didn't know what to do anymore. Was there a way to stop it for good, or was she forever bound to this nightmare? The child's smile twisted as it stepped forward, its eyes never leaving hers. Clara could only walk toward it, unsure of what awaited her, but knowing that the final confrontation was still to come. Clara faced the child in the thick fog, its grin twisted. Despite the whispers urging her to surrender, she stood firm, knowing this was her final test. The curse had consumed her family for generations, but she refused to let it defeat her now. With determination, she stepped forward, ready to face the darkness. Clara stepped closer, ignoring the child's taunts. She had learned the truth and embraced her strength. The child's form flickered, and Clara knew this was the moment to end the curse once and for all. She was no longer afraid. This time she would break the cycle. The child laughed menacingly, but Clara's resolve only strengthened. It tried to break her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had the power to stop it. With renewed determination, Clara focused on the ritual, chanting louder as the child's form flickered and began to falter. Clara's words became a force of nature, bursting from her with unyielding power. The child screamed in agony as the light engulfed it, its form dissolving. When the light faded, Clara stood victorious, but she knew the battle was never truly over. Clara stood in the now empty street, the fog gone, the curse broken. But the whispers remained in her mind, a constant reminder. Though the child was gone, the darkness inside her would never fully fade. She had won, but at a cost.